put out a little poll on my Patreon the other day with some video ideas, and the result of that poll was quite favorable to the Zelda theory you shouldn't do. So what am I on about exactly? I left that pretty vague, but any of you fine folks who watch the podcast that I run with my pal Game Over Jesse, the Hylian Gamescast, go check that out. You probably know exactly what kind of Zelda theory I think you should never do. So we're going to talk about geography. So quick disclaimer, geography-based Zelda theories are meaningless. The developers have stated on multiple occasions that the reason Hyrule's map changes so frequently is simply because they want to make the games more fun. If the map was exactly the same in every iteration of The Legend of Zelda, then that would get really boring really fast. However, they did not do that. And I think that lends a hand to the longevity of the series. They do have similarities and landmarks that stay relatively consistent with the overall goal of keeping things feeling familiar but fresh. You may have seen some sources, Hyrule Encyclopedia comes to mind, trying to make sense of this geography, with that book even going as far as to claim that all of Zelda 1 on the NES takes place in the top right corner of A Link to the Past's map because of the graveyard, I guess. But what if we actually did the forbidden? What if we could make a geography-based Zelda theory that actually held up? Why? Because of reasons. But first, let's lay down some ground rules. 1, I am not actually going to take this theory seriously. We're mostly just comparing the maps to see how well we can line them up. It's all just for kicks, really. 2, we're going to have to take expansion out of the equation. Obviously, Hyrule in Zelda 1, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and Breath of the Wild, etc. are not the same size, and the walking distance between, say, Death Mountain and Lake Hylia, which are pretty two consistently placed locations, vary between titles. So we're going to need to just set the size of things aside as being nothing more than the technological limitations that they really are. Number 3, not all maps encompass all of Hyrule. There's more on that in a bit. We'll call this the out of bounds areas. Number 4, there are some duplicate maps, so we're going to be discounting those entirely. For example, Zelda 2 has all of Zelda 1's map in just this corner. So we're just going to look at Zelda 1's map here just because I don't know what all of this crap is. It's not important to the rest of this. A Link Between Worlds is also just A Link to the Past's map again, so we're just going to use A Link to the Past to avoid redundancy there. Number 5, some landmarks may share a name, but may not be the same place. A big example of this is that there have definitely been a few different versions of Kakariko Village. They're all called Kakariko Village, but they're probably not the exact same place. Okay, are we cool with those rules? So let's jump in with our forbidden fan theory. So first thing we need to do is let's get all of our maps of games that actually take place in Hyrule and try to just line them up with Breath of the Wild's map. So here's our maps from Zelda 1, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Four Swords Adventures, Minish Cap, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and Breath of the Wild. We're also going to throw in Wind Waker just for kicks. Breath of the Wild is the most complete version of Hyrule to date, which is why we're going to try and fit every other map around that one. What I mean by most complete is, well, look at them all. As the maps got bigger, they end up going farther and farther out from central Hyrule. Some areas just start showing up in later games that just didn't exist before. Though probably did exist in the universe, they were just out of bounds, as it were. So areas we just didn't explore in those games. Now let's talk landmarks that we need to line up. On Breath of the Wild's map, we have several landmarks that are reoccurring throughout the series. We have Death Mountain, Hyrule Castle, Lake Hylia, Zoras Domain, and Gerudo Desert. This gives us a sort of skeleton of Hyrule's map to work off of here, and so far, I'm loving it. Let's see how Zelda 1 fits in with this madness stew we're cooking up. Let's just overlay them. Okay, So we're off to a good start here. Just straight up overlaying them kind of works. We have the coastline along the east that fits in. Death Mountain just kind of takes up the entire top of Zelda 1's map, but at least it's still up to the north. We also have a body of water that flows through the north, cuts through the center of the map, and flows out to the southern portion of Hyrule, not unlike Breath of the Wild. In Zelda 1, however, all the water flows from this one area in the north. I guess that's Hyrule's water source, as it were, which means we need to pin this as the equivalent to Zora's Domain, which is consistently Hyrule's water source. There is no Hyrule Castle seen in Zelda 1, though supposedly it does exist because we see it in supplementary material. And since Death Mountain is considered to be this whole area, we can just try and line it up with Spectacle Rock, since that is kind of the closest we're going to get to matching up with a proper Death Mountain of sorts. I guess you could kind of consider this area to be like the desert or whatever. I also have no idea what to do with the graveyard, to be honest, but it's not a complete list. Okay, let's take that out and slap in A Link to the Past instead. Okay, so now we are talking. We have Death Mountain in the very northeast corner, Hyrule Castle in the very center of the map. The Desert of Mystery is almost certainly just the Gerudo Desert, which is in the southwest of the map. Bonus, the Lost Woods, which contain the Master Sword, is directly west of Death Mountain in both games. Let's not forget our water source, Zora's Domain, is sort of just nestled into Death Mountain's armpit here. And once again, the water flows around central Hyrule, just like in Breath of the Wild, and into Lake Hylia, which is roughly in southeast Hyrule in A Link to the Past, though slightly more central southern Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. The swamp area of A Link to the Past, I guess, is the equivalent of the Faron grasslands. So far, we don't have to do any rotations or anything like that. God, this is a mess already, and we haven't even touched 3D games yet. So, Ocarina of Time, it's your time to shine. So, just as a side note, before we throw that map in there, I've said many times that Ocarina of Time's map lines up decently well with other maps in the series if you just rotate it about 45 degrees. But now that I'm actually looking at it, it's only kind of true if you're comparing it to A Link to the Past. If we line it up with Breath of the Wild, it's actually better to just not rotate it. The big outlier, other than the out of bounds stuff, is that Gerudo Desert is just, frankly, in the wrong place entirely. There's not much I can really do about that. Four Swords. Four Swords Adventure is kind of better. It's weird though because Hyrule is depicted here as an island, which it isn't in any other game. I mean, usually there's just a coastline along the east and the south of the map, but not surrounding the entire area. Still, we do have Death Mountain in the northeast and the desert in the southwest, Hyrule Castle right in the center, and Lake Hylia doing okay? Why are you so tall? Why is there a frozen tundra beside the desert? The Minish Cap. Surely we can make some sense out of this, right? A lot of people compare it to Ocarina of Time's map already and saying that it's the most consistent with that. So it's gonna work out, right? Minish Cap's version of Hyrule does not fit with any other game. Not even the other Four Sword games. Unless we rotate it? No. The only thing I could think of is that Mount Crenel is possibly Death Mountain, although somehow in the west instead of the east corner of the top of the map. You could make that argument because it just, the feel of Mount Crenel is the most Death Mountain-y. But you could also argue that the Veiled Falls is Death Mountain, since that seems to be the area with the most Gorons. They're either in the area just outside of the Veiled Falls, or Big Goron himself sitting at the top of the Veiled Falls. So, I don't know. Lake Hylia is somehow way in the east instead of the south. The Castor Wilds and Wind Ruins, I'm almost certain are the Tabantha region and the Ancient Columns in Breath of the Wild, but the rest of it is really off base. I'm sorry, but the Four Swords trilogy is sort of a write-off at this point. Bonus time, the Wind Waker. Honestly, Wind Waker's map, because it basically only has important landmarks, is a really good fit. Assuming Dragon Roost is Death Mountain, which, come on, it is. They both fall in the northeast. You can line up a lot of the areas really nicely. Heck, you could also overlay Wind Waker's with Ocarina of Time's map, and it still holds up decently. Not to mention, what little you see of underwater Hyrule actually feels right at home with the Twilight Princess depiction of Hyrule that we see, aside from the graphical art style differences. The only part that doesn't sit right between Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild's maps is Outside Island. It seems to just land in the middle of the Gerudo Desert. But you could argue that it's actually sitting on the top of the Gerudo Highlands, and due to the flooding and climate shifts, that's just made it into a more lush and tropical area, or something, I don't know. Now for Twilight Princess. I really like the world of Twilight Princess, but this does not fit. It didn't work for Minish Cap, but rotate? Actually, rotating the map of Twilight Princess about 45 degrees goes a long way to building our case on Twilight Princess. Death Mountain is at least more northeast than it was. This now puts Lake Hylia in the southern sort of central Hyrule, as opposed to off to the side, weirdly. And the Faron region now stretches out east from Lake Hylia, with the Gerudo Desert in the southwest. Hyrule Castle stays nice and centered in the map, and I think we can safely say that Snow Peak and Hebra overlap and are probably just the same region. But Zoras Domain sort of sticks out here as an outlier. We still have our water flowing all around central Hyrule, but also the world of Twilight Princess has these massive ridges and canyons that just don't exist in other games. The closest that Breath of the Wild has is the Tengar Canyon, which stretches from the north and to the west of Hyrule Castle. But we are actually doing okay here. Next on the docket is Skyward Sword. The map for Skyward Sword is very different from other games because it keeps the world sort of segmented into different sections. Twilight Princess sort of does too, but at least we have paths that connect them. Skyward Sword does not pay us this courtesy. But looking at the overall map, it seems pretty open and shut. Eldin region in the north surrounds Death Mountain, Gerudo Desert in the southwest, and the Faron region to the southeast. We even have Lake Floria in Breath of the Wild. The Sealed Grounds supposedly is the Great Plateau, which is still in the southern but kind of central area of the map. So it looks pretty good, right? Overall, all of these maps are fairly consistent, right? Wrong. Very wrong. Basically, none of this makes any sense, guys. We've compared every map of Hyrule, and while we can line up a few of the locations, the bigger picture just doesn't add up at all. I'm sorry to disappoint you guys, but you must have seen this coming, right? This is all surface level map comparisons, so even the parts that we were able to connect are kind of meaningless. We're looking at the maps without taking the actual viewpoint of Link or the player in mind. We're desperately clinging to a sense of consistency that isn't there. We haven't even looked at fault lines or elevations, and it already doesn't actually fit together. Zoras Domain goes from just the waterfall to a cave, to a bigger cave, to like a gigantic fish sculpture. The Lost Woods seem to change locations at every turn. Hyrule Castle itself changes between appearances. What is all this? Areas like this frozen Hyrule section of Four Swords Adventures make one appearance and then are never seen again. Even the desert is... Okay, actually the desert is always in the bottom left corner of... No!